begin again with the Mishnah in fact, we're starting with Bishul. We said that each one of the Talmidim of Pirkei gave three things for advice on how to keep a person in this world. And the second one we're going to be speaking about is Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua says, it's a short Mishnah, but it's a very fundamental Mishnah. Rabbi Shua says, Rabbi Shua Aimer, it's Mishnah Tes Zayin and Perek in Avos. Ayin hara, v'yetza hara, v'sinas habriyos. Now, ayin hara we know is an evil eye. We all hear that ayin hara. Don't give that person ayin hara. Yetza hara is also inclination, is the way they type it. V'sinas habriyos, and the hatred of other people is metzinas ha'adam min ha'olam. They remove a person from this world. Now, you can look at this many different ways, but the first thing we have to understand is this. This is really a direction and a device on how to behave and how to enjoy life. That's the first thing. If you have a person who is a miserable person meaning he sees somebody have something and it bothers him. It bothers him. So like three steps that happen over here. What happens is, first of all, he himself at night it just bothers him that somebody has something that he doesn't have. It doesn't even necessarily mean that he wants it for himself. It just bothers him that the other guy has it. And that's a big problem. It bothers him that he sees his neighbor's yard is not as nice as his yard. He has a decent yard, but the neighbor has prettier flowers. He has nicer windows. I'm just picking an odd thing. A nicer car. He has a good car. He has a good basic car, takes him what he needs. He doesn't really realize that the price on a more expensive car can be double what he's paying right now. But he just bothers him that the other person has it, and not so much that he doesn't have it. So what ends up happening is comes step two. This is what was step one. Step two is that a person starts to think badly. The Gemara says that when we say, do you hear that term always, don't give the other person ayin hara. The Gemara says that an ayin hara actually can harm somebody. There is something in that. There is something in your mind almost transmitting something to a higher something that can harm somebody else when you think badly of something because somebody has something, because somebody has a good life. You think badly about it. That's called an ayin hara, your eye. It's an evil eye. It's a physical thing almost. And the Gemara says there is something in that. You have to be very careful. When you do something and you see something that somebody has, that's when many people will not tell you how many children they have. If they have especially a larger family, especially they won't say how many grandchildren they have, because they don't want people to think about this. In fact, a Talmud of Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, with a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, he goes over to his Rosh Yeshiva and he says, Rebbe, I just want you to know, tomorrow I'm going to be a little bit late. So he says, why are you going to be late tomorrow? This was a married fellow. He was a koil, young man. And he says, because I'm moving. He says, why are you moving? He says, I found that I'm living in a small apartment. My family is, Baruch Hashem, grew a little bigger. And I found a gorgeous apartment. It's got sunlight. The rooms are large. The price is reasonable. The kitchen makes my wife very happy. He says, he was gushing about the apartment. Shem says, it's beautiful, Baruch Hashem. He says, is there any chance I can come visit the apartment in a day or so after you move in? She said, he said to Rabbi Shia, he said, I got all excited, of course. He says, I'll give you a call next week when you settle in a little bit. And if it's all right, I'd like to come over and see the apartment. Very surprising, but absolutely, Rebbe, I'm very excited for you to come. Week comes by and he calls over the Talmud and he says, any chance I can come over tomorrow morning? So he says, yes, we'll talk to my wife about it. And she's very excited. Of course you should come over. So he goes to the apartment the next day and he goes through every single room in the apartment. And the Rosh Hashiva, Reb Shlomo Zalman, is looking throughout every single room and just commenting on a positive note. Oh, look how pretty the how the light comes in, and the way you set it up, and every single room he kept going. And when he got to the kitchen, he turns and he tells his wife, he says, "This is a place you're going to be able to make simchas in Yetz Hashem." And he goes on and on gushing as himself about this wonderful apartment. He turns to them, he says, "I have to say, this is one of the nicest apartments in Yerushalayim." And he says, "Okay," and basically he's ready to go. And of course, the halach is you're supposed to walk your guest out, at least daladamas, 8 feet that would be. And the Talmud is pretty much really trying to figure things out. He says he's never heard Rosh Hashiva going to an apartment. I mean, it's on the way out. He says, "Rosh Hashiva, I know I really appreciate you came, and I'm very happy about you made my wife's day. But what's pshat in this?" He says, "I've never heard that you've ever done this before." He says like this, he says, "You went on and on about the apartment, and I'm sure you did it to your friends, and you did it to the Talmidim." He says, "Just like there's an ayin hara, there's also something called an ayin tova." He says, when you go and tell everybody about it, there's always going to be a niggling, and somebody else says, "Why couldn't I find that apartment? Why his mazel, he found it apartment. I could also use a larger apartment." And the guy doesn't mean badly. He says, but it's a bit, obviously it's a jealousy. And he, that's a normal human reaction. He says to counterbalance the ayin hara, he says, I wanted to give it an ayin tova. And there is something called an ayin tova. In fact, we learned the last Mishneh, when he was talking about the 5 things that the Talmidim of Zechan and Ben Zakkai said that's a midah tova. If we look at Rabbi Yeshua, at Rabbi Eliezer, he says, ayin tova. What is ayin tova? Ayin tova means you're actually triggering something that the Rebbeinu Shalom helps that this ayin tova should be in this apartment. And that's what I wanted to give you, to counterbalance the ayin hara. So we see there's something in ayin hara. But if somebody is a personality that just is an ayin hara, he gives an ayin hara. That's his nature. That's not a happy person. So the Yetzer Hara is the next step. Step number 2 says, Rabbi Yeshua, the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara starts to grind on him. What can I do to mess this thing up? Can I squeal on him that the property line is a little bit too big? Can I do so? Even though it's not going to help him in any way. It's not going to do any good for him. But if I can't, it bothers him, the other person has it, and the Yetzer Hara starts to like hook himself into the guy, and he's always thinking something of not in a good way towards that neighbor. So what ends up happening is a person that does that all the time, he's constantly obsessed with it. He's busy with it. So his nature, his mind sets off these negative endorphins. He becomes depressed when things still look good by the other. Look at that, 2-3 months later, he had another baby, another kid that's engaged. Baruch Hashem, we should be so happy that the other person has it. And he doesn't even have any kids that have to be engaged. But wow, look at this guy's mom. And it bothers him, and he becomes depressed. He becomes depressed, so what happens, of course? His blood pressure goes up, and he's constantly bickering, and he becomes a grouchy old man. And even though he doesn't have to be an old man, but he becomes grouchy. And at the end, what happens is people hate people like that. So step number 3 happens. V'sinas habriyos. He starts to hate people because they don't like him. They avoid people. Who wants to be next? Who wants to be a friend with somebody like that? Nobody. So he starts to avoid people. He avoids people, and people rather start to avoid him. They don't want to be near this guy. And therefore, somebody like that who becomes so depressed, high blood pressure, becomes ill, he becomes sick. The body reacts to negativity, and it becomes negative. And therefore, Maitzinas Adam and Oilam. Could you imagine that? It takes, so there's 2 ways to look at it. So I was saying, first of all, anybody that's withdrawn, he's depressed, he does things like that, he's not living. That's not called life. He's not enjoying it. What's life? Life is live, is living. Living means the flowers are blooming. You see the sun in the morning. That's living. Living is not sitting in a bed and being depressed. And if you're not living, you're not here. And that's Maitzinas Adam and Oil. And physically, it's Maitzinas Adam and Oil. If somebody's depressed, something, all of a sudden, the things start to happen. Your hair starts to fall out. You start to become, you start yelling at people. And unfortunately, people like that, unfortunately, pass away very young. So this very key to Rabbi Yeshua, what Rabbi Yeshua says, is constantly have a reverse. You should have an ayin toiva, which in turn will create a yetzer toiva over there, because you want to be excited when somebody has a simcha. You want, even though you don't even have it, and even if you have somebody at home, if you have a simcha and you're mesameach with somebody else, or one sees that you mesameach with somebody else, they give you a simcha as well. And of course, people don't want to be associated with the reverse of this Rabbi Yeshua. What Yeshua says right now there is not my tzinas, that he incorporates the whole world into his life, and he becomes his blood pressure goes down. He becomes healthier. He's running around between people, and it's a wonderful thing to have. And that's why, and unfortunately, we see now when whatever was going, people who stayed home a lot became very depressed. They were alone, and another person was able to go run down to another state and be comfortable and everything like that. And this person is depressed. He sits at home and he lays in bed and he can't get out of bed in the morning. And these people did not do well, unfortunately, and they become unwell. There was a story at the time of the Chofetz Chaim that there was a fellow that was similar to that. He didn't forget that anybody had anything. He lived in Radin, actually, in the city, the town of Chofetz Chaim. He became so miserable watching. He became he became an Anshem Mitzvah. See, he decided he doesn't want to be part of these people for whatever the reason. Somebody must have done something to him, or so in his mind, somebody did something to him. And maybe he wasn't successful, and he felt, why is everybody successful? The Jews are all successful, and I'm not successful. I'm part of them. I should be. Why don't I get? Why don't I give? In any case, it became an unbeliever, not to the point, the Yetzer Hara, so we said like this. He had an ayin hara. And then the Yetzer Hara started to work on him. And he says, I'm going to get these people. When you notice that people, the biggest anti-Semites, people who harm Klal Yisrael the most, are ones who were from Yidden that became not from. And you look at the world today, and you see the leaders of all of these organizations, all of these are all Jews. The Soros is a from Jew. His grandfather was a from his. I think even his parents were from. But at the end of the day, he is a leader. He's leading the negativity that's going on in our country. So we see this, that Jews are the leaders, unfortunately, that are able to be smart enough how to make upheaval. So what happened to this fellow in Radin is that he became an informer. He became an informer to the authorities. Anytime he saw somebody do something not 100% where the authorities can get him, he would inform on them. And of course, the person was arrested, and they suffered. The town of Radin suffered greatly because of this fellow. And what happened was, everybody avoided him. Same thing happened here. Sinus Sabrias. Things happened that Sinus Sabrias was terrible. He hated life. He didn't know. Kept looking for more and more that he can squeal on Klal Yisrael and Radin. And of course, at the end, everybody has their time, and he passes away. And they find a will. And he left the will. He says, I know I was a terrible man when I was alive. I would like to be punished now, so at least when I get up in Shemayim, Hashem shouldn't punish me as severely. And we saw this happen in Tanakh. And he said, I want you to schlep me through the streets in disgrace, and I want you to bury me in the cemetery upside down. I want my face to be down, which is against halacha. Halacha is supposed to be buried face up. And they didn't know what to do. Now, the halacha is really that a person cannot do something against halacha after he's dead, because he's not alive. You can't order somebody to do something against halacha if you're not alive, because you're not alive. Even if you're alive, you're not allowed to do it, but you can do it yourself and get punished for it. But you cannot order somebody after you die to do something against halacha. They went to the Chofetz Chaim. What should they do with this? Maybe he needs a takana. Maybe this will be his takana. Because in Tanakh, it was done actually. But again, it was a whole story. So in any case, what happened was, the Chofetz Chaim said, halacha is a person is normally buried. The Rebbeinu Shem will deal with him in the area up there. Not to Rebbeinu Shem. He did what he did. He unfortunately made mistakes, and he's gonna, everybody has to give it din b'cheshbon. And sure enough, they buried him normally. About 3 weeks later, the policemen came to the Chevra Kedisha, and they said, please show us the grave of this person. They went to the grave, and they exhumed the body. They looked inside, and they said, okay, that's fine. And they closed the grave, and they go leave. And these people were wondering what is going on. So what happened was that he left a tzava in his will that he wants you to post a letter to the authorities 2 weeks after he dies, telling them that he knows that the people of Radin are so angry at him that they're going to punish him after that. And they're going to carry them through the streets, and his tachrichim are going to be all torn up, and they're going to bury him face down, which is exactly what they do to all informers, which is a lie, of course. And you're going to see that's what they're going to do. And they went and they got the letter about 3 weeks later, and they said, oh, let's see what, maybe we can, put the Chaver Kaddish in prison. So they went into and then checked it out, and everything was checked out, so that they couldn't say anything. This man was so miserable that even in death, he wanted to get back at Klal Yisrael. He wanted to get back at the people of Radin. And that's all because it started with Ayin Hara, and which brings to the Yetzer Hara, which brings the Sinas Habriyas. So we just have to remember that in order to enjoy life, you have to enjoy other people's lives as well. You have to be able to appreciate that other people have a simcha and be misameach with them. And on that note, I'm going to finish a little earlier today. Just to bring, I want to mention the simcha that we welcomed the new Maishi into our family. Yesterday we made a bris, and Meryl became an aunt of a new baby called Maishi, and he should be zeicha to bring nachas to his parents and grandparents and great grandparents actually. And we should have a wonderful day. Have a good day.